Today, we have Peter Jaworski, who will be talking to us about markets in blood plasma. Okay? Peter is an assistant teaching professor at Georgetown University, where he teaches business ethics in the McDonough School of Business. He's the co-author of this fine book, Markets Without Limits. In a minute, I'm going to ask you to give him a very warm welcome. But I just want to say one thing about how today's proceedings will go. Professor Jaworski will speak for about 40-ish minutes or so, with a very entertaining slideshow presentation. And then I'll be conducting a Q&A session immediately following that. Currently, the going rate for asking a question is $2, and but that could change. But now you should join me in welcoming Professor Jaworski.
Thanks very much, Kyle, for that unconventional introduction. I appreciate it very much. Thanks also to all of you for coming out, and thanks for hosting me, Kyle. I appreciate it. The title of my talk is There Will Be Blood, the Commodification Objection to Paid Plasma Donations. But I'm going to spend a bit of time talking to you about a market and something else as well, something that I've worked on quite a bit. Over the last, I'd say, 6 months, I've shifted attention away from markets in kidneys to markets in blood plasma, and you'll see why in a second. Right? But first, I want to get a sense about the kind of audience that you are. So let me ask you the following kinds of questions. Right? I'm going to give you items on this list, and I'll ask you to raise your hand if you think that people should be allowed to buy or sell those things. Okay? So I'll give you a list in a second, and just raise your hand if you think that people should be allowed to sell the following items. So just raise your hand if you think yes. Okay, first one, kidneys. This is human kidneys. Whoa. Can I ask that the other way? How many of you think like, no, we shouldn't have a market in kidneys? Just nice and high, nice and high. I saw some people were shy about. Okay, all right. I'll tell you why I'm surprised in a second. What about blood? In favor of it. How many of you are like, no, we should not have a market in blood, or blood plasma? Nice and high, don't be shy. Please don't be shy. Oh, okay, so just you. What's your name, by the way? It looks to me like I'm going to address this talk to you. What's your name?
Tiffany.
Tiffany? Hi, I'm Peter.
Hi.
Hi, okay. Hair. How many of you are opposed to a market in hair? Tiffany. Okay. How about sex? Prostitution. In favor of it? How many of you are opposed? You are not alone, Tiffany. This time, okay? What about massage? It's like people touching your back intimately for money? Like, how many of you are opposed to markets and massage? Okay, good to know. What about hugs? I find this one to be really weird. How many of you are okay with people paying other people for hugs? How many of you are opposed to this? You know, you'll be, interesting, okay. You'll be pleased to know that, in fact, there are such things as like professional huggers, people who will hug you for a fee, right? And I guess they're really good at it. They're better than your mom, they're better than your friends, I guess. Right? And then finally, commercial surrogacy, which is like hiring someone to carry a baby for you to term. And how many of you are opposed to this? Not okay with that. Okay. So a largely sympathetic crowd. And the reason why I'm surprised, every time I ask these questions, no matter where I go, and I've been to a number of different places, and I've asked these questions at all of those places, the results are often the same. And the results are that a majority of people are in favor of markets and all of these things. Right? The one that always strikes me as really bizarre is this one, hugs. For some reason, I put that up there as a joke because I figured everybody would be like, yeah, of course you can have a market in hugs. But it turns out a lot of people are opposed to markets and hugs. But the one that I'm surprised by is kidneys and blood plasma, right? I would have assumed that more people would have said no, right? We shouldn't be allowed to buy and sell kidneys, and we shouldn't be allowed to buy and sell blood and blood plasma. And yet, like I've said, everywhere I've gone, people overwhelmingly say yes to those things. And the reason why that's really surprising is because I've read a lot of books about the moral limits of markets. And those books tell us that you and I, everybody, they use expressions like, we think the following items should not be for sale. And I've always wondered, like, why don't you take a poll and find out for sure? This was the motivation for me to take a poll at the start of these talks and ask people. And it turns out that according to my polling methodology, which is just whoever invites me to give a talk, and whoever ends up in the room, right? More people say yes to those than no. But there is a limitless market for books about the moral limits of markets. And in the last, say 20 to 30 years, there have been a number of books on the other side of this debate, right? So here, for example, is a famous book by political scientist Michael Walzer, right? It's actually a pretty terrific book, and he thinks that there are all kinds of limits to markets, right? Elizabeth Anderson has a better book than Michael Walzer's, right? And she, in fact, is a philosopher who is exceptional. Her work on commercial surrogacy, for example, I recommend to you. You should read her. You should read her articles. Deborah Satz is better still. She's a philosopher at Stanford. She wrote this book, Why Some Things Should Not Be for Sale, before Michael Sandel did. And her book is really excellent. It has a really subtle kind of argument. I recommend it to you. I do not recommend this book to you. This is being recorded. It's going to be public. Maybe I shouldn't say that. Is Michael Sandel, does he know about YouTube?
No.
Okay. Well, here's the most famous book in this genre. It's called What Money Can't Buy by the philosopher Michael Sandel. Right? Okay. I recommend this book, and this book over that book. I also highly recommend this book by Margaret Jane Radin entitled Contested Commodities. All of these people defend the following thesis, right? I'll tell you about the thesis in a second, but here is me, a very happy me, giving a less happy Michael Sandel a copy of my book. He went and gave a talk at Georgetown, and I showed up with my book. And my intention was to get him to sign my book to me, and I would give him $20. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to pay him $20 to sign a copy of my book. Now, I know that Michael Sandel now has at least 3 copies of my book. I know this because 2 of my friends went to his office and handed him a copy of my book. But when I went to talk to him, I said, "Hi, I'm Peter. I'm the author of this book, Markets Without Limits." And what I got was like a blank stare from Michael Sandel. He was like, "Okay, I don't know you. I've never heard of this." And so I realized, he doesn't know about this book. So then I said, I've come with a gift. Here's a copy of my book, which you can read on your airplane ride home. Here you go. That's not what I intended to do, but nevertheless, that's what I think. That's why he doesn't look so happy. Okay. They all defend this thesis, which we can call the repugnant market or the anti-commodification thesis. That thesis says that there are some things that it is morally permissible for you to have, use, and or exchange for free, but not for money. They defend an asymmetry. They claim that markets and money introduce moral wrongness where none was present. Now notice that this thesis is a really interesting and provocative thesis. The claim isn't that there are some things that money shouldn't buy. Obviously, that's true. The claim is that there are things that it is morally permissible for us to do or exchange for free, but not for money. Now, I defend this thesis. Nope. Everything you said was wrong. There are no things such that they are morally permissible for us to have, use, and exchange for free, but not for money. We claim, that is my co-author Jason Brennan and I, we claim that there is no asymmetry. Money and markets do not introduce wrongness where none was present. Now, that's an important thesis. Right? It's importantly the reason why it's important to understand the claims that we're making goes as follows. There are plenty of things that you and I shouldn't do. There are plenty of things that you and I shouldn't exchange. It would be really boring if the claim was like, first, let's establish that it is immoral for you to say lie, and then say something like, well, it would be immoral for you to lie for money. Obviously, that's true, but I'm interested. Similarly, you can establish that it's immoral to cheat, and then say, well, it's immoral for you to cheat and do it for money. Obviously, that's true. Cases like slavery or assassination contracts aren't the kinds of things that we're interested in. And the reason why is because slavery is wrong whether or not money and markets are involved. It would be wrong for King so-and-so to give a gift of slaves to like another king. Right? It's not money that makes slavery wrong. Right? It's something else. It's like the removal of the autonomy, of the rightful autonomy of another person. That's what's wrong. And whether you do that for money or for free makes no difference. So if I were to write a book that was entitled The Moral Limits of Wearing a Hat, and the content of my book said the following, right? I first established that it is immoral to lie. And then I said, oh, ta-da, a moral limit on wearing hats, because it would be wrong to lie and wear a hat. You would feel cheated. You'd be like, well, this book promised something interesting, namely the moral limits of wearing a hat. Where hats are the things that make the activity, the exchange, the possession of it wrongful. But instead, this guy pulled a trick, a fast one on us. And similarly, many people in this debate don't see that what matters is the cases where you are allowed to do, to have, or to exchange something for free but not for money. Where money and markets introduce wrongness where none was present. So this is the thesis that I endorse. Right? Now there's all kinds of objections to markets. There are in practice and in principle objections to markets. In principle, objections to markets tell us that there's something about like markets as such, something about what it is that they are that make them incompatible with certain goods and services. Right? In practice, objections, meanwhile, tell us that there are certain outcomes, certain empirical facts that obtain that make markets the wrong allocative tool for certain goods and services. Now, in the time that we have together, I'm going to say just a little bit about this when it comes to blood plasma, but we're going to spend the majority of our time on these kinds of claims. And then during the question and answer session, you can go ahead and ask me about the empirical questions that I'm sure, or I hope, that you have. Right, so here's what we'll do today. First, I'm going to motivate this talk. I'm going to tell you why this debate matters, and it matters a lot. Right? Second, I'm going to go over the mere commodity objection. I think it is probably the worst objection against markets in anything, but it is simultaneously the most popular, in my judgment, objection to markets in certain things like blood, like kidneys, etc. And then at the end, I'll talk to you about the wrong signal objection. Okay? Let's begin with blood plasma. Here are 3 products that you can make from blood plasma. How many of you have donated blood plasma? Not blood, but blood plasma. For money. Yeah? Where and when?
Portland, Oregon, 2005 maybe?
Okay, 2005. Okay. Do you know the company by chance?
No, I'm top of my head, I know.
Oh, okay. Oh, well. So you donate blood plasma, and there are at least 2 different uses for blood plasma. One is for transfusion. The other one is for plasma-derived medicinal products. These are plasma-derived medicinal products. This is immune globulin, right? This is a clotting factor, and this is albumin. These products are useful for a number of different life-saving treatments. Right? So if you're a hemophiliac, you need these products. If you have some kind of immune deficiency, you need these products. These are incredibly useful products. And over time, the market in these products has expanded dramatically. So let me just show you what's happened since 1984. In 1984, albumin was the plasma-derived medicinal products that was most frequently used. The total market size was about 1.5 million. This is in the entire world, not just in the US. By 1996, albumin, the demand for albumin had shrunk relative to immune globulin. This is now the most frequently used plasma-derived medicinal product. But the market grew to about 4.8 billion. By, what date do I have here? By 2012, the market had grown to a $15 billion worldwide market, and the number one product is immune globulin. In fact, when we look forward into the future, right, these trends are going to continue. We're expecting a doubling in demand of immune globulin alone by 2020. A doubling in demand, in global demand. This man here, Richard Titmuss, wrote a very famous book in 1971 called The Gift Relationship. He made at least 3 different claims. He said that we shouldn't allow blood and blood plasma to be bought and sold on the market. He argued first that the total amount of blood plasma that we can collect would decline if we offered money for it. Right? Now that's a counterintuitive claim. Let me make it intuitive for you. If you're thinking about donating blood, and suppose you want to go there out of the goodness or kindness of your heart, and you show up at the center and they say, well, we're going to give you $20 for this. You might then be inclined to say no and to walk away. And the reason why is because you went there in order to demonstrate that you are an altruistic person. And the introduction of money might make your friends and other people think that you did it for the money rather than because you're an altruistic person. And so the signal that you send, the signal of altruism, gets diminished. Titmuss theorized that the primary motivation for most people to go and donate blood and plasma and so on was this altruistic impulse. And so he worried that if we offered a certain amount of money for blood or blood plasma, fewer people would donate. He also argued that the quality of the blood and the blood plasma would be worse. The kinds of people that would be motivated to go and donate their blood and blood plasma are the kinds of people who are more likely to have the 3 big viruses, HIV, hepatitis B, and hepatitis C. And then the third claim that he made was that we shouldn't commodify blood. Blood is special. Blood is sacred. Blood is not the kind of thing that should be bought and sold on the market. I said I would say a few things about the in-practice objections, and I'll just recite. When it comes to plasma-derived medicinal products, Richard Titmuss was entirely wrong. The quantity of plasma that, the United States basically, the quantity of plasma that the United States collects is much greater because they compensate people. Meanwhile, the quality of that plasma-derived medicinal product, it is just as safe as plasma-derived medicinal products made from uncompensated donors. The reason why is because the technology that we have now, both to screen people, and the technology that we use in order to clean, right, to remove the viruses. We have viral inactivation protocols, and we have virus removal protocols, right, that we use now that we didn't have in the 1970s and the 1980s. The end result is that the last time there was any transmission of any HIV, HBV, or HCV was in 1994. That was the last time it was transmitted through a product. There were 8 cases, and the reason why is because the company in Germany failed to clean the tanks properly. Okay. That's what Health Canada says. Meanwhile, the amount of uncompensated blood donations is much higher in the United States than in Canada. It's much higher in Germany and Austria and the US. In fact, Canada, where we don't pay people for blood plasma, has a lower voluntary blood donation rate than the Czech Republic. People here in the United States still donate blood at a much higher level than just about every other country in the world, despite the fact that they pay for blood plasma. So the worry that Titmuss had, it's called crowding out, the worry that Titmuss had that paying people for plasma would result in fewer people donating blood, it just doesn't hold up empirically. And in fact, Nico Lachatera and Mario Machis have done a number of different studies, and here's what they found. They found that the Econ 101 claims apply to the case of blood and blood plasma too. The more you pay people for blood and blood plasma, the more donations you get, and the quality of those donations remain roughly the same. This measures the amount of deferments of donors, that is, people that are turned away because they hit for viral markers or they're otherwise sick in some other way. It turns out that compensated plasma donation is important for maintaining adequate and consistent supplies of plasma and limits the risk of undertreatment for the foreseeable future. Despite this fact, it turns out that there are 6 countries in the world, and only 6 countries in the world, where compensating people for blood plasma is legal. Right? Here's Europe. It's Germany, Austria, Hungary, and the Czech Republic. Those are the only countries in Europe where it's legal to pay people for blood plasma. It's complicated in each of these countries. So, for example, Germany insists that they are in keeping with the voluntary unremunerated standard. The reason why they say that is because they have passed a law that said if we pay people $25, 25 euro, or less, that doesn't count as compensation. It's a nifty trick. They're like, oh, you get $25 for donating blood plasma. No, that's not compensation. Why not? Because the law says it isn't. I think they're adjusting it for inflation, by the way. As we speak, I think they're changing it. In the Czech Republic, you have 3 choices. You can take like a tax deduction, which is what the companies that operate there would prefer that you do. You can take a tax deduction. You can get a paid day off work. In Italy, this is true too. In Italy, you can get a paid day off work, but that doesn't count as compensation. That's not compensation, right? I mean, it is, but it isn't. It isn't. And you can get paid by the company. Meanwhile, in Canada, it's been illegal since 1994 to pay people for blood or blood plasma. In 2014, a private company called Canadian Plasma Resources said that they would open 3 clinics in Ontario, and that they would give people a $25 gift card for a blood plasma donation. As soon as they said that, the Ontario legislature, the Ontario Provincial Parliament, introduced a piece of legislation called the Voluntary Blood Donations Act and made it illegal for that company to operate. Canadian Plasma Resources responded by saying, okay, we'll go to Alberta. As soon as they said that, Alberta was like, oh yeah, we'll pass a law making it illegal here too. And they did in 2017. So that company said, well, we'll open in Saskatchewan and in New Brunswick. They are now operating in Saskatchewan and New Brunswick, and they were hoping to operate in British Columbia, but British Columbia is currently discussing passing a Voluntary Blood Donations Act bill as well, right? Now, it turns out that the United States, that is all of you in this room, right, are responsible for 80% of the entire world's plasma collection and 70% of the entire world's plasma-derived medicinal product supply. The United States provides 70% of the entire world's blood plasma supply. The entire world. More than 80% of Canada's immune globulin comes from the United States. And the law, the Voluntary Blood Donations Act, it bans compensating Canadians, but it doesn't ban importation of plasma-derived medicinal products that are made as a result of compensated blood donors, blood plasma donors. That just like, I published an article in the USA Today, which was like, keep NAFTA. Canadians depend on your bodily fluids. That's the title. We also make it illegal to buy and sell sperm in Canada. We made it illegal in 1994, I think it was. It might be 1996. And we used to have a bunch of men that would donate sperm in Canada. As soon as we made it illegal, all of our sperm donor clinics shuttered because nobody was going there to give the gift of life, I guess. Right now, there is 1 sperm donation clinic in all of Canada, in Toronto. There are 30 to 50 men that donate sperm in all of Canada. 30 to 50 men. If you're looking for a sperm donor, I don't think you want like Genghis Khan's sperm. Okay, some people might get this joke. Like you don't want like 30 to 50. So what do Canadian women do? They go online and they check out some of the like sperm donor clinics in the United States where men can get paid for donating sperm, and so they do in large number. Okay. We won't talk about sperm. Okay, shifting gears a little bit and really driving the point home about why this debate matters. Look, every 10 minutes, and this is just in the United States alone, there's a new person added to the waiting list for kidneys. And here's what's been happening over the last number of years. These are the number of people that are on the waiting list waiting for a kidney. And these are the number of kidney transplant operations that we perform every single year. Now, notice what's happening. The waiting list is growing fairly quickly, but the number of transplant operations remains about the same. This slide conceals a bit of good news. What's the good news? Do you know why the number of people on the waiting list is growing so quickly? It's a good news story. What's that?
They're not
Yeah,
dying.
they're not dying as quickly. The dialysis that they are on is much superior now to before. So whereas before you would basically die within 5 years if you didn't find a matched person to give you a kidney for free, right? Now you can stay on that dialysis for more years. And it turns out that kidneys are the number one thing by an overwhelming number that people are on waiting lists for. When people talk about a waiting list for organs, they're talking about kidneys. Liver is number 2, and you can donate both of those. Right? We all have 2 kidneys, we only need 1. So this is the overwhelming problem. And every 18 minutes in this country, somebody dies because they couldn't find a matched kidney. Here are the people who either exit the waiting list because they're too sick to transplant or die every single year in the United States. There's about 6,000 people. 6,000 people in the United States die because they can't find a kidney. And so they do things like this. Right? Here's a billboard somebody painted, I need a kidney, here's my phone number. Right? Like, please get yourself typed and let's see if you're a match for me. Here's another billboard, help save my husband's life, living kidney donor needed. Here's the number, or go to this website. Here's a woman who says, young mother needs live kidney donor, is it you? Find stephakidney.com. Right? There's a guy in New Orleans, it's actually a heartwarming story, who walked around New Orleans with a sandwich board that said, my wife needs a kidney, and he walked around for something like 7 months. Every day, he'd get up, he'd put this sandwich board on, and he would walk the street. Somebody calculated like how many miles he tread, I don't remember, but it was some like huge number of miles. I said it was a heartwarming story because in the end, they found a match for his wife, and so he was successful. Right? In his case, it was successful. So how come people do things like this? How come people walk around with sandwich boards? How come people basically beg for you to like see if you're a match for a kidney? The reason why people beg is because they can't get access to a kidney. And the reason that they can't get access to a kidney is because we don't allow people to pay for kidneys. I'm very confident that a market in kidneys will fix this problem. I'm confident not just because economists have said so, and in general, I trust economists, which I do. Economists have said about 50 to 60,000 for a kidney would clear that market within about 6 months. Within about 6 months, we could save 6,000 people's lives. We could remove all those people from the waiting list if we allowed a market in kidneys. Those people don't have to die. Now I say I don't believe this just for theoretical reasons, because there's one country in the world that does have a market in kidneys, and they don't have a waiting list. But I should clarify, they have a waiting list, but it's a waiting list of people who want to sell their kidney, not a waiting list of people who need a kidney. Now that's a much better waiting list. Do you know that country? What country do you think has a market in kidneys? Yeah.
India?
Good guess, but no. I think you'll all be surprised. It's Iran. Iran has a market in kidneys. Iran has a not very good market in kidneys. Nevertheless, and there are many problems with this system, which I can talk to you about during questions and answers. If you want to ask me about Iran's system, Iran's market in kidneys, I'll be happy to tell you that there are many, many problems, many things that are not so good. And yet Iran has one nice thing about its system that I think redeems it entirely, and it's this. People don't die when they need a kidney. However bad that system is, it avoids the problem that we have in the US and Canada and everywhere else in the world, namely people dying for want of a kidney. So how come we don't have a market in kidneys in the United States? And how come we don't have blood plasma markets in most of the world with the exception of 6 countries? Well, there's many reasons, right? Al Roth says we have often found that distaste for certain kinds of transactions is a real constraint, every bit as real as the constraints imposed by technology or by the requirements of incentives and efficiency, right? Here's Deborah Sachs. She says we have an intuitive disgust or abhorrence to certain kinds of market transactions. She, like everybody else, doesn't really cite a poll, or it's why like they say like we. Who's this we, Deborah? Who's this we? Turns out like we, you know, like it's all of us. We just do. I don't know if that's true, right? But anyways, Patricia Cohen, it's been said so often that it's got to be true. It's got to be true. Patricia Cohen dissects the yuck factor, and she says people tend to find some markets repugnant. In other words, just hearing about them can cause a queasy sensation in the pit of your stomach. There's this like sense of disgust, this repugnance. Here's David Kuhn, the leader of the Green Party in Nova Scotia, right? And he's talking about blood plasma, and he says the idea of commodifying a part of a person in this way is quite repugnant. It's just repugnant to pay people for donating blood plasma. Repugnant. And here's an article that just says, look, there's just a widespread consensus that a commodification of body parts is to be prevented. Okay, so let's summarize this kind of objection. Let's put some meat on those bones and get it clear. Okay, this is the mere commodity objection. It goes as follows. Kidneys are not a mere commodity. To buy or sell a kidney necessarily means you regard kidneys as a mere commodity. So when you go to the market and you're like, I would like a kidney, that means you think of that thing as a mere commodity. It is wrong to consider or to regard kidneys as a mere commodity. Therefore, it is wrong to buy or sell kidneys. Right? And Michael Sandel, for example, he tells us that markets don't only allocate goods, they also express certain attitudes towards the goods being exchanged. What he's saying there is that like markets are a kind of language, like a kind of symbolic language. When you go and you buy or sell anything, you're communicating something more than that, like you like this thing more than this amount of money. Right? It's like symbolic expression. And part of that symbolism, they insist, is that what you are saying in every case is that you think of that thing as a mere commodity. As soon as you pull out your money, right, you're communicating this. Your attitude is this thing must be a commodity. Okay. Right, here's the Senate Labor and Human Resources Committee, the one that passed the 1984 National Organ Transplantation Act. They said that it is their sense that individuals or organizations should not profit by the sale of human organs for transplantation. They say that the committee believes that human body parts should not be viewed as commodities. Right? They shouldn't be commodities, and like as soon as you make them available to buy or sell, that means automatically that these people have this attitude. Right? As soon as they buy or sell. What does it take for something to count as a commodity? There are 3 criteria. The first is a denial of subjectivity. When you think of something as a commodity, you no longer think of it as like a thinking thing. And that's fine for this chair, right? It's fine to deny its subjectivity because this chair doesn't have a subjectivity. It doesn't have a perspective on the world, right? There's no inside here. But it would be wrong to think that of a human being, for example. Second, instrumentality. The commodified thing has only or mainly instrumental value. So we deny its intrinsic value. We say that its value consists in what we can do with it, what use we can put that thing to, and not some kind of intrinsic value that it possesses independently of how we might use it. And again, that's fine with this chair. Right? I evaluate this chair on the basis of how well it accomplishes the task of making me comfortable when I want to sit down. But it's not okay when it comes to people, and some insist that it's not okay when it comes to kidneys. And then finally, fungibility. The commodified thing is basically replaceable with money or other objects. In fact, possessing this fungible object is the same as possessing money. The worry here is that as soon as we put a price tag on something, then the value of this thing is reduced to this price tag, and then we can look at all of the other things that share that same price, and then we start comparing the object in terms. So I could get a kidney or a new iPad, right? I can get a kidney or this part that I need for my car. And people say, no. Don't compare human kidneys to parts in your car or an iPad. And the worry is that as soon as you put a price tag on something, you and I, we just fall into the trap of starting to compare these like special things to these mundane commodities, right? These mundane objects. Okay, good. How many of you have one of these? Nice and high, nice and high, nice and high, nice and high. And how many of you have one of these? And of those who have one of those and one of these, how many of you have this attitude towards them? Nice and high. Okay. No? No. Okay. All right. Okay, for those of you who have this attitude towards your cat or dog, raise your hand. Yeah, Tiffany, what do you have?
I have 2 dogs.
2 dogs?
Mm-hmm.
What are their names?
Corbin and Lilu.
What is it?
Corbin and Lilu.
Corbin and Leilu?
Lilu.
Lilu. Okay. Not named after the politician. Corbin.
No, Fifth Element.
Okay. Corbin and Lilu, they're 2 dogs. Okay. Those are actually pretty good names. I always find it distracting and a little bit like annoying when people give their names, give their dogs or cats names like Fluffy or like Goosey or something like that. You need to give your pets like proper names, respectable names, like Howard or like Richard. Those are proper names. And so are Corbin and Lilu. How did you get Corbin and Lilu?
I adopted them.
You adopted them. Anybody purchase their pet? Love them like a member of the family? How old are what do you have?
I have a German Shepherd named Wesley, and he's 9 months old now.
Oh, he's 9 months?
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody have like an older dog? What do you have?
Lab.
A lab?
Paid $600 for him.
You paid $600?
A fancy one.
How old is he again?
He's 10 or 12.
He's 10 or 12.
Yeah.
Okay. What's his name?
Walter.
Walter! Proper, respectable name. This, by the way, this is Howard. This is our cat. That's my wife Felicia there. This is our cat, Howard. Howard is a female cat. Why not? Howard responds to Howard. She loves the name Howard. Yeah, I don't need some. She doesn't obey gender stereotypes. That's Howard. Okay, so what was the name again? Walter? Yeah, Walter. Walter is how old? 10 to 12 years old. You paid $600 for it. Have you ever taken Walter to the vet?
Mm-hmm.
And how much did you pay for vet visits? What was wrong with Walter? Just pick one. Oh, just $100.
Blood test or something.
Nothing else has been wrong with Walter?
Not too bad yet.
Not too bad yet. I'll ask my wife, have we ever taken Howard to the vet?
Yeah.
What was the last thing that was wrong with Howard?
She needed her teeth cleaned.
And a few of them needed to be pulled. How much did we pay for that?
Well, we have another cat, so 2 of those close to $1,000.
Close to $1,000. Question, did you think about replacing Howard? We have 2 cats. One is Winston, the other one is Howard. I love Winston like a member of my family. I also love Howard as a member of our family. Question, did you ever think about replacing Winston or Howard?
Never. You probably did.
Let's keep this about it. Not about me. Notice, did you ever think about replacing Walter? You had to take him in for a blood test. You ever thought?
I haven't hit that threshold, but mine's lower than most people's.
Yeah, do you know what I do when my car breaks down? When my car breaks down and I have to take it to the shop, I see how much it costs to fix the car. As soon as I see like how much it costs, I start thinking about getting a new car. I start thinking about replacing the car. But notice that like what most people do when their cat or dog breaks down, they fix the cat or dog. And it doesn't matter how much you paid for your dog, right? For your dog Walter. If something was wrong with Walter that cost more than $600, would you even consider replacing Walter?
I would, but I'm not.
Oh, jeez.
I'm not the guy you do.
Most people would not. And the reason why not is because there's this distinction that's important, right? Maybe if there's time to talk about art, right? There's a distinction between some things being a commodity, which is just anything that's bought and sold on a market, and having a commodification attitude towards that thing. Namely, thinking of it as not having a subjectivity, as being merely of instrumental value, and thinking of that thing as perfectly fungible with cash. There is that difference. You and I can purchase a dog or cat from the pet store or from a breeder and still love that cat or dog like a member of our family. In fact, there appears to me to be no empirical connection between buying and selling anything and just about any attitude. You might buy a work of art precisely because you have the right, as it were, attitudes towards art. You might purchase a dog or a cat from a pet store and still love that cat or dog as a member of your family. Now, we could test that. We could look at people who have purchased their pets, and we could check to see how much they love their pets, and then compare that group to the group of people who would have purchased their pets but adopted them instead. And then see whether or not, like, which group loves their cats or dogs more. I suspect the answer is that the way that you acquired your cat or dog will have no impact on your attitudes towards your cat or your dog. So there isn't this connection between the two. There isn't a necessary connection between buying or selling anything and having this attitude towards that thing. Right? And that's the bottom line here. When you buy a cat, that doesn't mean you have a commodification attitude towards the cat. When you purchase art, it doesn't mean you have this commodification attitude towards that art. And so similarly, we can apply it to blood plasma and we can apply it to kidneys too. If we had a market in kidneys, I suspect that people wouldn't have this kind of attitude towards their kidneys. Okay, but you might send a signal. So you might not have this attitude in your head. You might not think of your cat or dog as a mere commodity. But when you go to a pet store to buy a cat or dog, other people watching you might think that you are communicating that attitude. And it might be wrongful in some circumstances to communicate that attitude publicly. And that's the wrong signal of judgment. It goes like this. Buying and selling certain objects tends to express certain morally deplorable attitudes. This expression occurs independently of any attitudes that the person may happen to have. Right? Again, markets and money are a kind of language, and you're communicating. If so, then commodifying certain objects is wrong. Therefore, commodifying certain objects is wrong. To sort of undermine and undo this argument, I'm going to tell you a story about King Darius. Okay? King Darius was curious about the funeral practices of people in his kingdom. And he thought to himself one day, he said, my people respect their fathers. And they all want to signal that respect publicly. The Greeks and the Galatians do different things, so I'm going to bring them here, and I'm going to ask them about those funeral practices. And so he brought forth the Greeks, and he said, Greeks, you respect your fathers? And the Greeks looked at King Darius, and they said, well, of course, King Darius, we respect our fathers. Tell me, pressed King Darius, how do you demonstrate that respect at a funeral? And the Greeks sort of scratched their heads, and they were a little bit confused. They were like, well, King Darius, we do what literally everybody does. Why we burn our fathers on a funeral pyre. I mean, doesn't everybody? Clearly, burning your fathers on a funeral pyre demonstrates, publicly signals respect. After all, that's how you release the soul into the afterlife. For them, it was just obvious that when you burn your father, you publicly signal respect for your father. And if that strikes you as counterintuitive, picture a flame right here. Now picture someone who has deceased. And now picture me putting that body on that flame, and now tell me what's the first word that pops into your head. Here we go. First word. Yeah, cremation, but what's the first word that pops into your head? First word. No, not smell. First word. Fire. Person. Huh?
Love.
Close?
Love.
What was that? Duh! Respect! Fire person, respect. That should be intuitive to you. King Darius sent out the Greeks. He was like, okay, that's good. And he brought forth the Colossians, and he pressed the Greeks, he said, would you ever eat your fathers, your deceased fathers? And the Greeks looked at King Darius with horror in their eyes, and they said, King Darius, that idea is morally repugnant to us. Do you know what else we eat? We eat broccoli. Some of us even eat peas. If we were to eat our deceased father, why, we would treat our fathers like we do mere food. It would corrupt the very meaning of funerals. It would be disrespectful. King Darius sent away the Greeks, and he brought forth the Colossians, and he said to them, Colossians, you respect your fathers. And the Colossians were like, why, yes, King Darius, of course we respect our fathers, doesn't everybody? Tell me, he asked, how do you demonstrate that respect at a funeral? And the Colossians, much like the Greeks before them, sort of scratched their heads confused. And they said, well, King Darius, duh. Obviously, we eat the hearts of our dead fathers, right? Doesn't everybody like to eat the heart of your deceased father? Just means that you respect your father. Isn't that obvious? Let me check. This is someone's heart. This is me eating that heart. Now tell me, what's the first word that pops into your head? Well, I heard disrespect, but the opposite? Yes, also gross, sure. But also respect. Am I right? Isn't it just obvious? Respect. King Darius pressed, and he said, listen, would you ever burn your father on a funeral pyre? And the Colossians, much like the Greeks, were outraged. They said, King Darius, that idea is repugnant to us. To burn them would be to disrespect them. Do you know what else we burn? We burn garbage. If we were to burn our deceased fathers, well, we would treat them exactly the same way as we treat our garbage. It would disrespect them, and it would corrupt the very meaning of funerals. Now, what's the lesson behind the King Darius story? The lesson is that the connection between symbols and their meaning is conventional. It's not written into the fabric of the universe. Right? Here's a professional funeral mourner. Her name is Ding Ding Mao. She's from China. You can pay her to cry at your funeral. It isn't disrespectful in that place, although you might think so, although Michael Sandel definitely thinks so. She will cry at that funeral. There's a symbol and a meaning, but that's conventional, the attachment between the two. To kind of illustrate this a little bit further, I told you about funeral practices, but here's another one. Right? What does this mean? I'll do it with the camera too. It does, right? Not yet. What does it mean? It means fuck you. It means fuck you. It's disrespectful. Two of them worse than one. This is disrespectful. If you want to be disrespectful to someone, you go like this. But does it have to mean that? Like, just look at your hand for a second. Like, look at your hand. And suppose we don't have the custom or the habit of using a middle finger to mean disrespect. Now suppose you really want to like tell someone that you don't like them or you disrespect them, right? Is it really that obvious that this finger is the one that should do it? Right? Why not something else? Are you like the thumb? No, that won't do. That clearly means something else. That means you're okay, right? That's not what you. What about this one? No, this one clearly is the one that I would use to indicate like that thing over there. That's not what I want, right? This one, for sure, this is the one that does it, right? No, of course not. We just have this custom, this habit, right? This symbol means fuck you, but it means that contingently, and it doesn't have to mean that. We could have like a different convention, right? You and I. Like we can agree that for purposes of this talk and for no other purposes, this means thank you and I respect you. Thank you and I respect you. In which case, if I did this, what's like the respectful thing to do in return?
Flip you off back. Do you want me to do it?
I mean, it would be respectful. Yeah, I'll give you 2 chances. Yeah. We could change the very meaning. And in some cases, we should. I told you about funeral practices. There was a tribe in Papua New Guinea whose funeral practice was involved eating the brains of the deceased. And along came health people from the West, and they said, guys, stop it, because you're all dying from prion disease. Your entire culture is going to be wiped out if you continue eating the brains of the dead. Now, they could have responded by saying, but it's just so obvious that eating the brains of the dead means respect. How you want us to disrespect our dead? No, just change your funeral practices. And the point here about kidneys and blood plasma is the following. We can get more kidneys. We could save a lot of lives. But if the reason that you don't want a market in kidneys is because you think it's disrespectful, then what we need to change is what communicates respect and not avoid having a market in kidneys. Okay? Compare 2 worlds. Here's our world. On our world, we make wedding speeches, and we buy birthday presents, and we buy flowers as gifts, and we buy dinner on Valentine's Day. And all of those things seem fine to us. Here's another world where they pay for wedding speeches, they make birthday presents, they grow flowers as gifts, and they make dinner on Valentine's Day. Question. Which Earth, our Earth or twin Earth, is the morally good Earth? Answer? Both. Both, neither. These are just conventions. We can change them, and it wouldn't make a difference in terms of the moral landscape. So you can imagine Michael Sandel. I mean, you don't have to imagine, because Michael Sandel, in fact, does say this on our Earth. He says, some people buy wedding speeches. Can you believe it? Don't they know how this is disrespectful? Footnote, I purchased a portion of my best friend's, I purchased a speech from a website for my best friend's wedding. I was the best man at that wedding. I thought it was easier that way. But you can imagine Twin Sandel on Twin Earth going, some people write their own wedding speeches. Can you believe it? Don't they know how this is disrespectful? It's the most important day of this person's life. If you cared about them, wouldn't you hire a professional? If you're going to a wedding and you're like, oh, I'll take care of the photographer. Oh, okay, good. And you show up with like a smartphone and you're like, click. People are like, what are you doing, you idiot? Hire a professional. With like professional equipment. Why don't we do that when it comes to speeches? Too. So the bottom line here is that the meaning of market transactions, including the use of money, are not written into the fabric of the universe. It's a contingent fact, a mere convention. It's not immoral at best, it's bad manners. Right? So here's what we've done. This debate matters, and it matters quite a bit. Like lives hang in the balance about when it comes to the debate about the moral limits of markets. I've told you about the mere commodity objection, and it turns out that like there's no necessary connection. It's just contingent. And I've told you about the wrong signal objection, and my response is that markets can mean different things, and in some cases, they should. And I think for you and I, we should change the meaning of a market transaction when it comes to kidneys and blood plasma. We should think of it as a respectful thing to do, to sell your kidney and to sell blood plasma, not a disrespectful way. Thank you. Yeah, they especially thank the two of you.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, you're not going to believe this, but the price to ask a question has dropped significantly. So if you do have a question, all I need from you is you to raise your hand. That's all.
Or a finger.
Or
So thanks for coming.
Thank
Good
you.
fun. Appreciate it. Aside from the philosophical objections that you've raised, what are the primary objections? Just take Canada, for instance. Is there a thread amongst the government folks that tell us all how to be that you've seen that they're tapping into?
The main objection to
Yeah.
like paying people for blood plasma.
Why they're making it illegal? Yeah.
The most frequently cited objection is this ambiguous one, this like, oh no, it's commodification. The most compelling objection, and the one that they also use, is about wrongful exploitation. People are concerned that if we have a market in blood plasma, and if we have a market in kidneys, people will be exploited. Poor people, basically Al Gore has this quote during the debate in the National Organ Transplantation Act. He said a market in kidneys would make the poor a source of spare parts for the rich. So that's the worry that they express. Okay. When it comes to blood plasma markets in the United States, I've crunched some numbers and I've looked at the data. You get paid between $25 to $50 per donation. You can make about $400 a month. $25 to $40 per donation. On average, it represents 40% of the revenue that those clinics receive for every unit of blood plasma. A unit is 800 milliliters. 40% of the money that the clinic receives for that plasma represents the compensation that they pay. So in terms of the amount of money that they pay the donors, it's a significant chunk, 40%. A further, like 40% is salaries that they pay others. Of the remaining 20% is like other costs, and their profit is a tiny slice. In Canada, Canadian Plasma Resources, right now their profit is zero. So in terms of the like relative amount of money that the clinic gets compared to the donor is well compensated in terms of the benefit of the exchange between the two of them, right? Okay, that's one. The other one is the amount of money that donors get paid is not small. It takes about an hour and a half for your first donation, and then about an hour for every other donation. You get paid between $15 to $25 per hour. In America, people are screaming about, let's go for 15 as like a minimum wage. Those clinics pay fairly well. It's a pretty good amount of money. In terms of who donates, yes, people who are less than wealthy, they're not absolutely poor because the process requires you to have an address. You have to have an address that the clinic checks, and the clinic also has a list of like addresses that are bogus addresses, and they check you against those addresses. Some, like Shire in the Midwest, has a parking lot, an independent building, and they seek to attract people who drive cars. So automatically that increases the demographic profile of the donors. Okay. Poor people are more likely to sell their plasma than wealthy people. Okay. But I'll ask you this, like suppose we were to remove this option, right? How have we helped them? People worry that like poor people are going to sell their kidney and are going to get about $30,000 to $40,000 for that kidney. Okay, how do we improve their lives? By removing what they perceive as their best option. I don't understand why people think that we do the poor a good turn when we eliminate a source of income that they might tap into. So that's my response to the wrongful exploitation argument. One, they get paid quite a bit. Right? Two, the amount of money that they receive represents almost half of the benefit that you get from exchange. And then three, we don't improve. Sometimes it's good to remove choices, right? I don't deny that, but I don't see why removing this choice improves the lot of the poor. So I don't see it as, I don't think it would be exploitation. Now suppose that everything that I've just said you find totally unpersuasive. No problem, right? I'm happy to say, okay, nobody who makes less than $50,000 a year is allowed to donate a kidney. Ta-da, right? There goes that demographic, right? How about, I'm happy to compromise to get something like a market in kidneys here. If your worry instead is like, how will poor people afford it? My answer to you is like, well, how do poor people afford food? Answer? Well, there's like food banks and like charity places, right? But also food stamps. We could institute kidney stamps. And if you're worried, oh no, that's going to be really expensive. What about the cost of Medicare and Medicaid? 1 year of dialysis is more expensive than the top estimates by economists for a kidney transaction or a kidney transplant. Dialysis is exceedingly expensive. We would save money to this, we being government. Right? So you can always just change the details of the way that we allow a market. License donors. We license people before they drive cars. We license people in medicine, but we still have a market in healthcare. So we can license donors. We can say they have to go to school, they have to come to a place like this, right? And spend like a month or 2 months. And they have to pay up front, suppose. There you go. Now I've just shifted the demographic profile, and now only people who can afford it up front could go and get licensed in the first place. So I don't even have to say you can only donate a kidney if you make this amount of money. I say you have to get licensed. And then I make it so expensive that poor people can't afford it. And now we've taken care of 2 objections all at once, right? And the license is like, well, some people don't know what they're getting into before they donate a kidney. Well, if we license them, they will know what they're getting into, and that would fix that problem too. Thank you for your question.
Another question.
The man who rudely gave me the finger earlier.
So you're talking about how Iran has legalized a legal market for organs. How
kidneys,
just kidneys? Okay,
Yeah.
so for kidneys, for example, how would legalizing a market for kidneys or any organ, how would that affect like black market organ harvesting?
Oh, I love this question. Right? How would it affect black market? My guess is it would eliminate black markets in organs. Consider if the United States legalized a market in kidneys, like here, I have my lunchbox just for this purpose. So now I want you to picture, what's that?
I have that lunchbox too.
Amazing. All right. Well, we're lunchbox brother and sister, I guess. Picture me. You're a hospital now, and I come to you and I say, "Hey, I've got a kidney. Want to buy a kidney?" You're a licensed hospital in the United States. What do you say to me? Are you nuts?
No.
Absolutely not. We would never risk our license for this kidney. They go, I got kidneys in the bathtub. You want to get some kidneys in the bathtub? If that's like weird to you, or if you don't find that intuitive, like what do you think happened when we ended alcohol prohibition? You think like, were there shootouts? No. Right? If the United States were to legalize a market in kidneys, I think that would represent an enormous drop in the black market for kidneys, right? It would just do away with a lot of those problems. I mean, that's something else. That's another reason to do it, right? Another reason to do it. Right now, there's like a village in the Philippines where just about every male over the age of 16 has sold one of his kidneys illegally on the black market. There are some pretty powerful images of like people going there taking pictures of all the men sort of lifting up their shirts and showing the scar that they have from the kidney operation. These are all like, there's people who are dying, and if you're dying, you're desperate. And when you're desperate and you don't have a legal option, for people who have the money, they turn to operations like in the Philippines. Right? So I think the worry about like waking up in a bunch of ice with your kidney missing, like I get those email chains too. I think that worry is a worry about the current state of affairs. It's actually not a real worry. Let me just dispel that. That's all nonsense. You're not going to wake up in a bath full of ice with a kidney missing, right? But But to the extent that that worry is real, it's more real in the current state of affairs than it would be if we legalized a market in kidneys. Thank you. Thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
Okay. So let's say I'm ready to sell a kidney like right now.
Oh, good. I have a box for that.
But what do we do about this? Is there a proposition? What can we do?
Well, it's so frustrating because the recommendations like change a law. That's like one of the most futile things, one of the most futile endeavors you can ever get into is trying to change a law. But that's what you'd have to do, is change the law in the United States. There are movements afoot to try to clarify the difference between compensating someone for a kidney and covering their expenses. Because the law in the United States is so strict that like anything that might resemble compensation ends the, so if you find a match for your kidney and that person is willing to give you their kidney for free, it's technically legal right now to pay for the other person's expenses. But suppose that person, and this actually happened, was like, oh, who's gonna take care of my farm animals while I'm at the hospital? And the person who's receiving the kidney says, like, oh, I've got a sister who will go and take care of your chickens while you're doing that. That might be enough to count as compensation, and so they stopped that. And they in fact stopped that, right? In one case that I read, Janet Radcliffe Richards, I think is the philosopher who was trying to donate a kidney to someone. And then somebody said, oh, I've got farm animals, who's going to take care of them? And she said, oh, well, we'll take care of it. And then the hospital was like, no, that might be compensation, so no. And then that person didn't have a match any longer, right? So there are attempts to make it clear, like what counts as compensation or what counts as like paying someone or covering their expenses. Right? If we clarified that, that would go some way, I think, in helping the problem. But the other thing is just to legalize and market kidneys. And doing that is like, good luck. I hope it happens. How you doing over here, Tiffany?
Good?
Good?
Oh, no.
Hey,
Hi.
so, 2 questions. Are there cases where you think the open commodification of something or other plays against some sort of correlated, weakness or problem in us such that, I'm trying to state this without making the exploitation argument,
Yeah.
but are there cases, we don't think the kidneys are, but are there other cases where you think open commodification exacerbates or tilts against, perhaps some contingent fact about human biological nature or whatever, such that it, is bad for us and, warrants our being cautious about the commodification there? And if so, I'm kind of guessing your answer is, but those are cases where you use some clever regulation of the
Okay.
instance.
All right. Now, I was careful to talk about blood plasma donations and plasma-derived medicinal products. There's a reason why. Our screening procedures are much better than they were in the 70s and 80s, but they're still not good enough. And when we're engaged in this debate, we're engaged in a debate about plasma-derived medicinal products. Because the steps that they can take later, they can pasteurize plasma. Right? They use cleaners and detergents that inactivate and remove so many of those viruses that we are now confident that this is a product that won't lead to viruses being spread. But when it comes to blood and blood plasma for transfusion, it is a fact that certain certain groups of people are drawn to compensation, and they do have a higher likelihood of having HIV, HBV, and HCV. So when it comes to blood, here's an empirical fact that I am not I'm not yet ready to say we should have a market in blood. Now, I suspect that there are regulatory procedures that we could take, because it's a much clearer sign when somebody doesn't have a high school diploma, that they are more likely to be someone with HIV, HPV, or HCV, or hepatitis E, or hepatitis A, or some kind of prion disease. Right? So we could require that people who are compensated have, at minimum, a high school diploma. Better yet, like a college degree. So that would be a regulatory feature that I think would fix that problem. In terms of like other things, apart from those kinds of concerns, I know that there are plenty of markets that will exacerbate certain problems. I can't think of any off the top of my head, but I'll take a rain check. If I come up with some in the next like 5-10 minutes, I'll come back to you. Because there are plenty of these cases.
Well, what about fingers?
Yeah, so my view on something like that is first it would have to be okay to do for free. Right? I gave a version of this talk at Brigham Young University, and Brigham Young University attracts Mormons primarily. Right? So I gave this talk, and at the end somebody raised their hand and said, well, what about prostitution? Like, what do you think about prostitution? And I'm like, well, you know, you tell me, do you think it's okay for people to have sex with strangers for free, like for fun? And they said, what? No. So don't worry, you can embrace the thesis of this talk. Because you don't think it's okay for free, then you don't think it's okay for money. Right? So when it comes to the fingers, like, I don't think it's okay to just be like, oh, I got a gift for you, it's my finger. Right? So I'm not.
Does that have to do with the irreplaceable nature of the thing in question? Because blood comes back and sex is sex, but fingers and kidneys are gone forever.
I think it would be harmful to the person, and in principle, I'm okay with all sorts of paternalism. And I can't envision or can't imagine cases where you would be better off with a finger missing. If there are such cases, then a market would be fine, provided that we could capture all and only those people for whom it would at least not be bad for them to remove a finger, or their desire to remove a finger was so strong and totally prior to like the amount of money that they were offered. Those would be cases where I'd be okay with it. So the one that you might have in mind is like the case of a German who advertised and said, hey, I would like someone to like kill me and then eat me. And then somebody was like a Craigslist ad or something, and then somebody in Germany was like, I'll do that. Yum, right? Like, and so they did it. Right, in that case, I'm like, not okay with that. Surprise! I don't think that's okay.
I might be more okay with that than you, but.
Yeah, it's possible.
Can I ask another question?
Yeah.
There's something weird about, you have two slides up there. The first one was the Senate subcommittee hearing,
Yeah.
just asserting, you claim without evidence that commodification amounts to exploitation, and it's bad for people, therefore illegal. And then the next slide you had Sandel, I think, making this claim about markets are a kind of way of expressing,
Can we bring it up?
what we find repugnant, and we express our desires of what we like, what we don't like. And maybe I didn't follow, but that's a weird disconnect, because the Senate subcommittee hearing banning organ commodification is not a market expressing itself, it's just some congressman saying something that seems intuitively true to them. But is Sandel suggesting, or is the claim that if we had an open market for all of these things, people would then express what they find repugnant or what they find acceptable, and that people would, the desire or the market for kidneys would just plummet, would never get off the ground because people find that abhorrent?
Okay, but
That makes sense?
I don't know what this is.
yeah. So the Senate committee.
Yeah,
Yeah.
those two.
Yeah. So Sandel is telling us that like markets are a kind of language that communicates certain things, and then he insists that amongst the things that they communicate is that I think of anything that I buy and sell as like just being of instrumental value, as being fungible with money, and like having no subjectivity. Now the Senate committee just says that like they don't think it's a commodity. Michael Sandel is like saying more. He's like reinterpreting this for them. So they're like, we don't think it should be, we have this like intuitive disgust, we're not sure how to spell it out, we don't think kidneys should be regarded as a commodity. And then Michael Sandel comes along and puts meat on those bones. He says, okay, well here is my understanding of your disgust, here's my way of trying to tell you why you object to thinking of these things as commodities. And I'm sure that if the Senate read What Money Can't Buy by Michael Sandel, they would nod along and they were like, this is exactly what we meant. Right? So this is just Sandel rephrasing what they're saying and saying that it's a kind of language. And then in response, I say things like, first of all, even if markets are a kind of language, and I grant that they are, they communicate different things when we're talking about an auction. Like different contexts change what message you're communicating. So take art as an example, right? In the art world, they don't say that they're selling art because they too worry about like commodifying art. You can't commodify it. Instead, they just have a fancy new word for it. It's called de-accession. They de-access art. They don't sell it. Google that because it's such a pleasure to like see that. Like, it's not selling, it's ruble tubble, right? Like, it's something different, right? Okay. I think that like exerts an effect. The fact that they choose this different word, like you and I as philosophers, we might look at that and go, what? The same things happen here. But nevertheless, it might result in like communicating different things. Art is auction. I think that's an important piece of the puzzle because you don't go to a grocery store and buy Rembrandts, right? You go to an auction and you purchase it at auction. Same with horses and other kinds of things too. The things that are auctioned are typically things where we have no very good idea as to their value. That's one. Second, the reason why is because we think of them as like unique, right? This is the word, I forget his name, but like he's a sociologist. One thing that Jason Brennan and I did is we read a lot of sociology. Because Michael Sandel was like, here's what money means. And we were like, well, that, in principle, that's an empirical question. Has anybody researched the meaning of money? And sure enough, Viviana Zelizer, the chair of the sociology department at Princeton, has a book called The Meaning of Money. Michael Sandel's like, I'm sitting here, I'm looking at the dollar bills. And I'm like, this is what we need. And Viviana Zelizer is like, yeah, but I'm out there asking people, doing the work, and I have an answer, and here it is. This is the meaning of money. And what does actually, this is really appropriate because Richard Taylor just won a Nobel Prize in economics. One of the things that he does is he talks about mental accounting, right? And here's what you and I do, which we shouldn't do, by the way, but we put money in different boxes. Viviana Zelizer went out to Oslo and she looked at like the historical record of prostitutes working in Oslo. Prostitutes made a lot of money in Oslo, and yet they could never pay the rent. They could never afford their children's education. Why not? So she went and she investigated. It turns out that you and I engage in moral earmarking. We earmark money. This is dirty money. This is clean money. We spend dirty money on dirty things, right? The prostitutes in Oslo, when they received money for prostitution, would only spend that money on drugs, partying, alcohol, that kind of dirty living, right? And then they also received a separate income, which they called clean money, and they would spend clean money on rent, on their children's education, and so on. And they found that they constantly couldn't pay for their clean lives, despite the fact that this box was huge, full of cash. So the claim that money is fungible, right? We attach this meaning to money, and we separate. It would be interesting to find out whether plasma donors do the same kind of earmarking when it comes to the like Visa gift cards that they receive for donating blood plasma. That's worth looking into, right? That's worth looking into. So people do distinguish this thing, right? People do make distinctions when it comes to money alone. We do this mental accounting, and we do this moral earmarking. So it would be interesting to see whether or not people make those distinctions in the case of kidneys and treat that money differently, preserving the sacredness of kidneys through a financial transaction. Just as we preserve the uniqueness and interestingness and whatever of art by using an auction rather than by just putting it for sale at the Walmart.
So maybe that works as a answer to the question I was going to tell me. Because I was thinking, like very rarely when I say that something is wrong, do I intend to convey the idea that I think it's necessarily wrong. And so if I say something's wrong, you say, no, but it's just this convention and it's not necessary. I didn't say it was necessarily wrong, I just said it's wrong the way things are. So I was thinking about, well, have you thought about what are ways to change how malleable conventions are about the kinds of like worries that people have about this kind of thing?
I think that's a great question, right? Because it's not that like every time I buy a kidney, I think of it as a commodity. You might think that like, no, it would be wrong if sometimes you did. Like rephrasing it and making it stronger on the other side would be like, people should never think of kidneys as a commodity. Right? If we have a market in kidneys, then some people will. Sometimes. And that's bad. And it's bad enough. Now I say that's not bad enough. I'll take that and people not dying. Right? Like people dying is worse than me having an attitude of commodification towards, oh no, he thinks of kidneys as a commodity. Right, but this guy's dying. Right? It would be better if we didn't allow this guy to die. Right? That's morally more important than that you and I preserve this like sacred attitude. Okay, but my answer to you then with this stronger view is then we need to look at different ways of buying and selling kidneys. So here's one way to do it. One way is to take money off the table entirely and instead give people like a certificate for education. Like something that's useful for another category of things that you and I think are safe. Here, look. You're both, all three of you are professors here, yes? No, you're not. You two are professors here, right? Okay. Is this how you pay your professors? At the end of a lecture, does the professor stand at the door with his hand held out and you like all reach into your walls and like, oh, okay, let me write a check for the lecture? Right? No.
They do this.
They strangely, they didn't attend this talk, so I think they mean something else. But go ahead and think of that as respect and gratitude if you want. You don't do that. Instead, you pay tuition up front, and then it's like what percentage of that goes towards your professors? You don't know. You don't know. You don't know. It's a big magical like mystery box. It's like here's how much is tuition here? How much is tuition here?
$500.
3,700, almost 4,000.
Oh, that's per semester?
Per semester.
That's per course?
No.
Semester. Heavily so.
About 9.
Wow, that is extremely reasonable. My students pay $60,000 for, okay. But you pay it up front, and then some mystery happens, right? And then internally, it's like your professors get paid, and then there's like, that field gets paid for somehow, and like the chairs in the room, right? And I think that's important. Like none of these people, that is the people at the beginning that I showed you, think it's wrong to like buy or sell books. And a good thing too, because they make money from those books. None of them think it's wrong to like pay for education. And a good thing too, because they get paid for what it is that they do. They're professors. Right? Do they think education is sacred? Absolutely. Every single one of them. Educate, it's about the future. It's about helping children become awesome and adults. It's super special. Do you get paid for what you do? Yes. Right? Not you, sorry. I'm looking at you like, you're my Deborah Satz now. And I'm like, do you get paid for what you do? And Deborah Satz says, yes, I do. Right? It's like, Deborah Satz is a bad example. Elizabeth Anderson is better, right? But like, do you still think education is sacred? Yes. So then how is it that you still think that despite the fact that there's price tags on everything in education? And the answer is, well, we have a way of paying for it that's like interesting. When I go to the doctor's office, the doctor doesn't, I say, how much is this x-ray? And the doctor's like, I don't know. Right? Nobody knows. There's like an administrator who can tell you or something. And that's separate from what it is that the doctor does. So the doctor is in this world where like he gets a check every month, but he's like, I don't know how that gets into my account. right? We have these systems. And I think, Kyle, to answer as long-windedly as I possibly could, your question is like, there's probably different ways of buying and selling things that allows us to preserve, like there's different rituals that we can engage in. And we can do that on the market, and we do that on the market for things like education and healthcare that can allow us to like preserve the sanctity, as it were, of like the thing without like corrupting it or contaminating it with thoughts of fungibility of money and cash.
This is our last question.
Better be good.
All right.
Because Tiffany was going to ask me a whole series of questions.
So I am wondering whether the market is necessary for getting what you're after. Because an alternative I can imagine is that the state would pay people to supply kidneys at a certain fixed price, and it would control that price and keep it high in some way that they think is fair to the person being reimbursed for their kidney. And I mean, the context for me even thinking about it this way was one way of looking. You don't have to accept this context as a way of framing it, but I want to give it a possible, what I think is a good case for it. One way of looking at sort of the regime against prostitution is that a society has its way of pricing sex, and it wants to keep the price very high so that, you know, it's only within certain sorts of, you know, committed relationships that a person buys and sells their sexual power, and they don't want that to just bottom out so that people are performing sexual services for bargain-basement prices, blah, blah, blah. The case with donors becoming sellers of kidneys is, I think, intelligible even apart from the parallel with prostitution. In other words, what if the culture wants to say, we don't want people selling their kidneys or their plasma for, you know, prices that we think are too low. So I guess maybe my question is just, would you be just as satisfied if, you know, the lives are saved, the state is the intermediary that fixes the price, and people still get reimbursed rather than just doing it for free?
Yes. I would be okay with that. Like, the most important issue in this debate is like there are people who are dying and they shouldn't be dying. They don't have to. They're dying needlessly. And then you can go like, what does Peter want? And what Peter wants ideally is like, yes, market on both the demand and supply side. Right? I think it'll be fine. I think the evidence from like plasma markets, I think it shows that like people will get paid a lot, and they do get paid quite a bit. So I think that would be fine. That's like ideal. How far away from my ideal am I willing to go? Given the criteria you've offered, like we save all those lives, I'm happy with that, right? Because that is the most important thing. It's like, can we save those lives? We've got a real problem with plasma-derived medicinal products going forward into the future. Because forget about the American supply. Americans are going to be fine. But the global supply, we've got a significant problem. Canada, we need more of those products. And right now, these products are really good for like hemophiliacs, you know, people with immune deficiencies, certain problems. But there is some evidence that albumin might be useful against dementia and Alzheimer's. Suppose that sometime in the future, we discover that it is useful for something that affects more than like less than 3% of the population. If we hit on, if one of these products is good for one of those things, demand for that product is going to go straight through the roof. What are we going to do? We don't have enough. We can't just keep tapping American veins, right? We're going to have to do something. We're going to have to incentivize people to do it. Now, the particular system that you've got, you've basically introduced a pricing mechanism on the like supply side, and then removed it from the demand side. Great. I'm satisfied with that. It would definitely represent an improvement over the current system, just in terms of if all I'm interested is in how much taxes I pay, suppose that that's my attitude, that's all I care about, I should endorse that too, because the government will spend less. Assuming that they won't spend more than what dialysis costs in a year. Right? So I would be fully on board with that. By the way, here's one. A market in children's features. So as we're able to change the eye color, change the height, change all those different things, right? There's something where having a market in that thing might result in certain choices being made. And it might be problematic what choices.
You mean genetic manipulation of the fetus?
manipulation, yeah. And it might be alluring. We might do things that don't just eliminate cancer or whatever. We might also decide to pick certain features, and then that might lead to problems. Although I don't see why random draw is so much better, but nevertheless, because that's what we have now. It's what kind of kid are you going to have? Who knows? Let's just throw these genes together and see what pops out. Right? I don't see why that's superior. And nevertheless, that's something that might be difficulty.
Thanks, Peter Jaworski.
Thank you.
And
Yep,
then you'll see the numbers roll.
it's rolling.
Okay, good, and then you stop it the same way.